Okay, year 6. So we're on to chapter 3 and 4 of Skellig by David Almonds. We talked yesterday about the themes of flight, birds, death. Think about where they're incorporated into the story. I wonder how many of you noticed the name of the street that he lives on. Story gets a bit interesting now. Chapter 3 and 4, not a lot happens particularly, I don't suppose. But once we've done that, I want to go back to the end of chapter 2, look at the description of the garage. You're going to get a worksheet to look at highlighting adjectives and nouns, but also I want you to draw the garage as best you think using the description. Okay, so you'll have to do that on paper. Take some photos of it for me, send them back to me. I want quality work here, 6. Some of it I'm getting appears just rushed. All right. I know a couple of people have done really good stuff, particularly when we did the superhero cars. Other people just did a 2-second drawing. It's not good enough. I will start pulling it back. Okay, so chapter 3 and chapter 4. Are we ready? The garden was another place that was supposed to be wonderful. There was going to be benches and a table and a swing. There were going to be goalposts painted on one of the walls by the house. There was going to be a pond with fish and frogs in it. But there was none of that. There were just nettles, thistles, weeds, half bricks, lumps of stone. I stood there kicking the heads off a million dandelions. After a while, Mum shouted, was I coming in for lunch? And I said, no, staying out in the garden. She brought me a sandwich and a can of Coke. Sorry, it's all so rotten, love. And we're all in such rotten moods, she said. She touched my arm. You understand though, don't you, Michael? Don't you? I shrugged. Yeah, I said. She touched me again and sighed. It'll be great when everything's sorted out, you know. I sat on a pile of bricks against the house wall. I ate the sandwich and drank the Coke, and I thought of Random Road, where it'd come from, and from all my mates like Leaky and Coot. They'd be up on the top field now playing footy. It'd last all day. Then I heard the doorbell ringing and heard Dr. Death coming in. I called him Dr. Death because his face was grey and there were black spots on his hands and he didn't know how to smile. I'd seen him lighting up a cigarette in his car one day as he drove away from the door. They told me not to call him Dr. Death. They told me to call him Dr. Dan. And I did when I had to speak to him, but inside he was Dr. Death to me. And it fitted him so much better. I finished the Coke, waited a minute, then I went down to the garage again. I didn't have time to dare myself or to stand there listening to the scratching. I switched on the torch, I took a deep breath and I tiptoed straight inside. Something little and black scuttled across the floor. The door creaked and cracked for a moment before it was still. Dust poured through my torch beam. Something scratched and scratched and scratched in a corner. I tiptoed further in and felt a spider's web breaking on my brow. Everything was packed in tight, ancient furniture, kitchen units, rolled up carpets, pipes and crates and planks. I kept ducking down under the hose pipes and ropes and kit bags that hung from the roof. More cobwebs snapped on my clothes and skin. The floor was broken and crumbly. I opened a cupboard an inch and I shone the torch in and saw a million woodlice scattering away. I peered down into a great stone jar and saw the bones of some little dead animal that had died in there. Dead blue bottles were everywhere. There were ancient newspapers and magazines. I shone the torch onto one and saw it came from nearly 50 years ago. I moved so carefully, I was scared every moment that the whole thing was going to collapse in. There was dust clogging my throat and my nose, and I knew they'd be yelling for me soon, and I knew I'd better get out. I leaned across a heap of tea chests and shone the torch into the space behind, and that's when I saw him. At first I thought he was dead. He was sitting with his legs stretched out and his head tipped back against the wall. He was covered in dust and webs like everything else, and his face was thin and pale. Dead blue bottles were scattered on his hair and shoulders. I shone the torch on his white face and his black suit. "What do you want?" he said. He opened his eyes and looked at me. His voice sounded like he hadn't used it in years. I said, "What do you want?" My heart thudded and thundered and pounded in my chest. I said, Then I heard them yelling for me from inside the house. Michael! 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 I shuffled out again. I backed out through the door. It was Dad. He came down the path to me. Didn't we tell you to stay out of that? He started. Yes, I said, I know. I started to brush the dust off myself and a spider dropped away from my chin on a long string. He put his arm round me. It's for your own good, you div, he said. He picked a blue bottle out of my hair. He thumped the side of the garage and the whole thing shuddered. See, he said. Imagine what might happen. I grabbed his arm and stopped him thumping it again. Don't, I said. It's all right, I understand. He squeezed my shoulder and said everything would be all right soon. He laughed. I'll get all that dust off you before your mother sees you. Weird or what? Chapter 4. I hardly slept that night. Every time I did drop off, I saw him coming out the garage door, coming through the wilderness to the house. I saw him at my bedroom. I saw him come right to the edge of my bed. He stood there all dusty and white with dead blue bottles all over him. What do you want? He whispered. I said, what do you want? I told myself I was stupid, that I'd never seen him at all, that it had all been part of some strange dream as well. I lay there in the dark and I heard Dad snoring, and when I listened hard I could hear the baby breathing. Her breathing was cracked and hissy. In the middle of the night, when it was pitch black, I dropped off again, but she started bawling. I heard Mum get up to feed her. I heard Mum's voice cooing and comforting. Then there was silence again, and Dad snoring again. And I listened hard for the baby again, and I couldn't hear her. It was already getting light when I got up and tiptoed into their room. Her cot was beside the bed. They were lying fast asleep with their arms round each other. I looked down at the baby and I slipped my hand just under the covers and touched her. I could feel her heart beating fast. I could feel the thin rattle of her breath and her chest rising and falling. I felt how hot it was in there, how soft her bones were, how tiny she was. There was a dribble of spit and milk on her neck, and I wondered right then if Dr. Death was right. Was she going to die? They'd been scared about her at the hospital before they let her come home, before she'd been in a glass cage with tubes and wires sticking in her, and we'd stood round staring at her like she was some kind of fish in a tank. I took my hand away and took the covers around her again. Her face was dead white and her hair was dead black. They told me I had to keep praying for her, but didn't know how to pray or what to pray for. Hurry up, get strong, I whispered. Mum half woke up and saw me there. What do you want, love? She said. She stretched her hand out of the bed towards me. Nothing, I whispered, and tiptoed back to my room. I looked down into the wilderness. There was a blackbird singing on the edge of the garage roof. I thought of him lying behind the tea chests with cobwebs in his hair. Who or what was he? I'd have to find out. That's the end of chapter 4, year 6. Who was in the garage? How exciting. Right, get your work done.